The security guard looked out into the corridor for a second, and two young men, probably junior officers, entered the office, who, obviously aware of their upcoming actions, began to pull on examination gloves. "Once again, I suggest that you voluntarily," he emphasized the last word in his voice, "give out illegally obtained funds. You can't expect any leniency after the search begins." His ostentatious confidence, oddly enough, allowed Elena to calm down. She leaned against the wall with her back, and pursing her lips in disgust, nodded her head. "Look for it." Two employees from the archive were invited as witnesses. One of the operatives asked for the keys to the safe, and began examining its contents, while the other looked into the drawers of the desk without much enthusiasm, as if knowing in advance that he would not find anything untoward there. Without even bothering to rummage through the spread-out papers, he moved on to examining the women's bag standing on the windowsill. However, before that, he looked carefully at his boss and showed his find to him with a fleeting gesture. He nodded his head in silence and turned to Lena. "Elena Yurievna, is this your bag?" And after receiving a nod of confirmation, he clarified, "What's in it?" Lena shrugged her shoulders in disbelief. "My personal belongings." The major moved a little to the side so that the silent witnesses could see everything that was happening. The young girls who appeared here on the orders of their superiors were quietly panicking. Elena Yurievna was loved by the prosecutor's office, and everything that was happening with Captain Averina now caused confusion, if not more than a sharp dislike for the organizer of this action. But this only concerned the staff of the prosecutor's office. The representative of his own security service, on the contrary, seemed to feel a sense of deep satisfaction, and the leading search operators were indifferent. They were just doing their job. The archivist had to put up with it, and it's understandable you can't argue with your superiors. The next moment, a gambling spark appeared in the eyes of the policeman, who was busy with the handbag, and with considerable triumph, he pulled out a white, unstamped envelope without any labels or pictures from his side pocket, which he first showed to the major, then confidently placed his find on the table. "Is this your envelope, Elena Yurievna?" the security guard asked dispassionately. Lena was quite surprised, because she saw him for the first time, which she stated. "But you won't deny that it was taken out of your purse, will you?" the major asked. "No, I won't," she replied calmly, having managed to understand the whole essence of what was happening in those few seconds. "Even more, I will say that this envelope was slipped into my purse by the same citizen Rusakova, with whom I allegedly demanded a monetary reward, and who left this office about 40 minutes ago. She didn't tell you that I had to drain her with water because of a masterfully staged tantrum, and take the water in a cooler in the hallway, where I had to go out. Unfortunately, none of the staff was in the office at the time to keep watch, as everyone had gone to lunch." The operative lifted the flap on the back of the envelope and, with some special, habitual movement, poured several $100 bills onto the table, which were unusually arranged on the lid in the form of a fan. There weren't more than 10 bills, and it wasn't a particularly large sum, but they looked nice. "Is this your money, Elena Yurievna?" the restless major continued. "No, not mine. But even if you magically find the word bribe on these bills now, it doesn't mean anything." Elena's voice got a little stronger. "I didn't hold this money in my hands, and my fingerprints can't be there." The answer was expected, but the major seemed even pleased with it. A condescending smile appeared on his face, which he reinforced with the phrase, "Well, let's check it out." And in a completely different voice, harsh and decisive, he gave the command to his subordinate. "The money is in the technical department for examination." He turned back to Elena. "I hope your fingers are in the database. Then don't forget the envelope." Lena's hairpin did not achieve its goal. The major simply parted his lips in a kind of smile. "Absolutely." While the remaining operative continued the search fluently, and the colonel and the major sat on chairs at different ends of the office waiting for the results of the examination, Lena, who did not like the security officer's excessive confidence at all, began to consider the possibilities for the development of the situation when her fingerprints on banknotes could be detected. There was silence for several minutes, occasionally broken by the rustle of papers being sorted by the operative. but he couldn't find anything else criminal. Then his partner appeared in the office and immediately handed the expert opinion to the chief. The major skimmed through a rather large text and silently handed the sheet to the prosecutor. He read more carefully, maybe some passages twice, and as he read, his expression became more and more gloomy. Here, Elena shamelessly broke the silence, which had become quite tense. "Viktor Stepanovich, may I comment on the expert opinion?" And without waiting for an answer, she continued. "Out of all the bills sent for examination, 5 may have my fingerprints on them, but the rest, as well as the envelope, do not. There are others on the banknotes with my fingerprints, also female, which are not in our database, and there probably aren't any prints on the envelope at all." The colonel looked up from the report sheet and stared thoughtfully at his subordinate, not knowing what to think. Everything Elena said was exactly in line with the conclusions of the experts. He couldn't figure out how she could know that. Is she really involved in everything that the major has spun? Or does her brain work differently and she calculates all the moves of her detractors at once? But the major looked at the suspect, exactly as he saw her, in a completely different way. Irritated and suspicious, which did not go well with his tightly compressed lips and red spots on his face. None of the senior officers were in a hurry to join the conversation. As for the younger ones, those who realized that everything voiced by the prosecutor's office investigator corresponded to the conclusion, looked at her with all their eyes with easy-to-read surprise, and even admiration. Elena, without waiting for any questions or permissions, quickly continued. "Last year, my husband, son, and I went to Turkey on vacation. After the trip we had $500 left, which we had saved. We thought about flying to Vietnam this year, but we didn't manage to. We spent the whole vacation with our son in the hospital. On Friday we decided to deposit these dollars in the bank, which they still have to lie around for a whole year. Moreover, money is needed after the vacation. So on Saturday, I handed them over to the Moscow Credit Bank. These are the only $500 bills I've held in my hands over the past year. I counted them at the checkout. And the other prints on the banknotes are the cashier's prints. She counted them in front of me, and then she ran them on her banknote detector. It's easy to check. Cash register number 2. It's about 11 o'clock. Well, as for the fact that there are no prints on the envelope, that's understandable. Why would Citizen Rusakova put herself in such a position? My fingerprints are not on the envelope. But hers are. Her story was quite plausible, and the colonel's frown gradually began to change to benevolent and respectful. But the major did not want to give up. How did the money get here? Did you tell someone that you were going to deposit dollars at the bank? And your enemies followed you right behind and immediately bought the money back to slip it here? You must admit, it's very hard to believe. The mysterious car and the nondescript man with receding hairline were extremely interesting, not only to Maxim, but also to Lena. Valera, who did not know the whole story, looked at everything that was happening with delight, but his comments boiled down mainly to the regret that he was only looking after his car, and not around where it was going on. So many interesting, mysterious things. We need to take a closer look. Maybe he'll find something interesting. If Maxim was mostly guessing after computer searches, then his wife went the way of real things. First, she asked Valera to enlarge a number of pictures and received both the license plate of a black Toyota and a decent photo of a man entering the entrance. Secondly, she had already called her friends, operatives, and technicians from home. The former easily punched through the car owner's number, and the latter launched a screenshot of a man starting to go bald into the facial recognition program of the police base. The search results seemed to be expected of her. In any case, when she informed Maxim about this, her face was tired and disappointed. But some kind of anxiety was visible in a series of emotions. "Max, do you know who owns this black Toyota?" "What is it?" she asked, and without waiting for her husband's reaction, she voiced it. "To Captain Vasnetsov, the henchman of our evil genius." Now everything became completely clear, even to me, an ever-doubting young lady, and not a police captain. And even though he didn't show up anywhere, I have no doubt that he was the one driving. Entrusting such an expensive car to someone is the height of frivolity. Unlike Lena, Maxim was completely calm. He had already decided everything for himself, and blamed himself only for the fact that at one time he listened to his wife, who convinced him to give a chance to correct a vile and cruel man. And Lena continued, "That's not all. This smart guy with a receding hairline is none other than a famous burglar named Deck. He is also an avid gambler but unlucky. He loses most of his loot at cards. He has better luck in his profession. The captain has interesting friends. Although not the captain, but rather the colonel. Is it clear who bugged us?" "What is it?" she asked her husband, who was thinking about something. And, again, without waiting for an answer, continued. "And in the car, when they moved under the windows, they listened to our conversations. That's how they found out about dollars. What are we going to do now?" It was easy to read the carefully concealed concern in her question. Maxim, noticing her confusion, tried to distract his wife from sad thoughts and, even in his own opinion, answered too optimistically with an inimitable Caucasian accent. "How to do what, Sluchet? Ma. We will punish evil." Lena realized that Max was trying to support and encourage her in such an unusual way, but she just smiled sadly. "I'm not against retribution, Max, especially since there is something to punish, but I still want the court to determine the punishment. But it seems that if the case goes to court, it will be somewhere closer to our retirement. And it is not yet clear with what losses for us." Maxim correctly assessed Lena's reaction to his foolishness and became more serious. "Why such pessimism, dear wife?" "What is it?" he asked, although he wasn't going to wait for the court's decision. "Max, everything that we have found today is clear and important only for us. We are sure that Vaznetsov brought the deck and he installed the bugs, and we know why this was done. And for the court, that's bullshit. This is all circumstantial evidence. Well, there was a car in the yard, so what? Well, a man came into our entrance, and what? Who knows why? As I understand it, there are no fingerprints of this deck in our apartment. He's not stupid enough to work without gloves. Still a professional. So it's not provable. Here. Something like that." Here, Maxim came up with a brilliant idea, and he decided to drag Lena to his side. "And if, so to speak, the defendants in this case, whom we know, themselves declare their role in the process? Well, will this Rusakova say that Colonel Neznov bribed her? Or will the deck state the same thing? Or does Neznov himself admit everything? Can you imagine?" "I get it, Max," Lena said wearily. "A measure of protection." She thought about it and said anyway, "I'm against it, of course. But if there's no other way out, they'll come up with something else, not just a fake bribe. Right now they have obvious punctures, because time was extremely limited. Just in short supply. We decided on the spur of the moment. Anyway, we've achieved something. I've been suspended from my job for the duration of the investigation, so I'm not your assistant in many cases." Maxim, delighted with a small victory, nonchalantly waved his hand. "Never mind. We'll figure it out." Citizen Rusakova, who so masterfully played a grief-stricken mother in the investigator's office that she didn't mind giving a title, lived on the outskirts of the city in a very ordinary 5-story Khrushchev. By the look of the entrance door alone, it was safe to say that honored and national artists definitely did not live here. So, it was alarming. The dented metal structure, which bore numerous signs of advertisements pasted on for months and bright inscriptions by young artists, was completely devoid of any locking device. There was no overhead or magnetic lock, door closer, and even more so there was no intercom. There wasn't even an ordinary return spring, so the door swung shamelessly back and forth, either gaping wide open or shamefully covering a rather shabby entrance vestibule. And it only depended on the place of residence of the scurrying inhabitants of different floors. Those who lived higher up naturally did not bother closing the door, but those who were lower still covered it, trying to get rid of street noise, dust, and drafts walking around the entrance because of the second door on the opposite side of the house, which also often did not close. There was a bench at the entrance, probably the same age as the house. It was in the 70s, when the construction of the Khrushchev buildings was already ending everywhere. Such gardening and park benches made of individual wooden bars with cast-iron sides began to appear en masse not only in parks and squares, but also in courtyards. That's what they put here. It has been painted and repainted countless times, but once again the paint began to fall off in whole layers, so that the appearance of this bench became more and more unassuming every day. Moreover, one of the bars at the very back broke right in the middle, and the ends of this unsightly piece of wood rested on the courtyard asphalt, rising at the edges. No one cared about that disheveled door, or that broken peeling bench. It was here, according to the criminal case, that the young robber Rusakov lived with his mother. Lena remembered this from the criminal case. She categorically refused to go up to the apartment. If this undeserved artist sees her, and even tells the USB major about it, Elena will not seem enough, and it will end up not only with suspension from work. After instructing Maxim what to say, what questions to ask, and how to behave, Lena waited for him and sat down on the broken bench near the entrance. It was possible to sit here. A few minutes later, the phone rang. Lena, Maxim's voice was clearly confused. She says she hasn't been to any prosecutor's office. I was with the police at the very beginning of the investigation, when my son was detained, but I have never been to the prosecutor's office, and today, I only went out of the apartment to the mysterious car, and the nondescript man with receding hairline were extremely interesting not only to Maxim, but also to Lena. Valera, who did not know the whole story, looked at everything that was happening with delight, but his comments boiled down mainly to the regret that he was only looking after his car and not around where it was going on. So many interesting, mysterious things. We need to take a closer look. Maybe he'll find something interesting. If Maxim was mostly guessing after computer searches, then his wife went the way of real things. First, she asked Valera to enlarge a number of pictures and received both the license plate of a black Toyota and a decent photo of a man entering the entrance. Secondly, she had already called her friends, operatives, and technicians from home. The former easily punched through the car owner's number, and the latter launched a screenshot of a man starting to go bald into the facial recognition program of the police base. The search results seemed to be expected of her. In any case, when she informed Maxim about this, her face was tired and disappointed, but some kind of anxiety was visible in a series of emotions. Max, do you know who owns this black Toyota? What is it? She asked, and without waiting for her husband's reaction, she voiced it. To Captain Vasnetsov, the henchman of our evil genius. Now everything became completely clear, even to me, an ever-doubting young lady, and not a police captain. And even though he didn't show up anywhere, I have no doubt that he was the one driving. Entrusting such an expensive car to someone is the height of frivolity. Unlike Lena, Maxim was completely calm. He had already decided everything for himself and blamed himself only for the fact that at one time he listened to his wife, who convinced him to give a chance to correct a vile and cruel man. And Lena continued. That's not all. This smart guy with a receding hairline is none other than a famous burglar named Deck. He is also an avid gambler, but unlucky. He loses most of his loot at cards. He has better luck in his profession. The captain has interesting friends. Although, not the captain, but rather the colonel. Is it clear who bugged us? What is it? She asked her husband, who was thinking about something. And again, without waiting for an answer, continued. And in the car, when they moved under the windows, they listened to our conversations. That's how they found out about dollars. What are we going to do now? It was easy to read the carefully concealed concern in her question. Maxim, noticing her confusion, tried to distract his wife from sad thoughts and, even in his own opinion, answered too optimistically with an inimitable Caucasian accent. How to do what, Slyusha? We will punish evil. Lena realized that Max was trying to support and encourage her in such an unusual way, but she just smiled sadly. I'm not against retribution, Max, especially since there is something to punish, but I still want the court to determine the punishment. But it seems that if the case goes to court, it will be somewhere closer to our retirement, and it is not yet clear with what losses for us. Maxim correctly assessed Lena's reaction to his foolishness and became more serious. Why such pessimism, dear wife? What is it? He asked, although he wasn't going to wait for the court's decision. Max, everything that we have found today is clear and important only for us. We are sure that Vasnetsov brought the deck, and he installed the bugs, and we know why this was done. And for the court, that's bullshit. This is all circumstantial evidence. Well, there was a car in the yard, so what? Well, a man came into our entrance. And what? Who knows why? As I understand it, there are no fingerprints of this deck in our apartment. He's not stupid enough to work without gloves. Still a professional, so it's not provable. Here, something like that. Here Maxim came up with a brilliant idea, and he decided to drag Lena to his side. And if, so to speak, the defendants in this case, whom we know, themselves declare their role in this, the process? Well, will this Rusakova say that Colonel Neznov bribed her? Or will the deck state the same thing? Or does Neznov himself admit everything? Can you imagine? I get it, Max, Lena said wearily. A measure of protection. She thought about it and said anyway. I'm against it, of course, but if there's no other way out, they'll come up with something else, not just a fake bribe. Right now they have obvious punctures because time was extremely limited. Just in short supply. We decided on the spur of the moment. Anyway, we've achieved something. I've been suspended from my job for the duration of the investigation, so I'm not your assistant in many cases. Maxim, delighted with a small victory, nonchalantly waved his hand. Never mind. We'll figure it out. Citizen Rusakova, who so masterfully played a grief-stricken mother in the investigator's office that she didn't mind giving a title, lived on the outskirts of the city in a very ordinary 5-story Khrushchev. By the look of the entrance door alone, it was safe to say that honored and national artists definitely did not live here. So it was alarming. The dented metal structure, which bore numerous signs of advertisements pasted on for months and bright inscriptions by young artists, was completely devoid of any locking device. There was no overhead or magnetic lock, door closer, and even more so, there was no intercom. There wasn't even an ordinary return spring, so the door swung shamelessly back and forth, either gaping wide open or shamefully covering a rather shabby entrance vestibule. And it only depended on the place of residence of the scurrying inhabitants of different floors. Those who lived higher up naturally did not bother closing the door, but those who were lower still covered it, trying to get rid of street noise, dust, and drafts walking around the entrance because of the second door on the opposite side of the house, which also often did not close. There was a bench at the entrance, probably the same age as the house. It was in the 70s, when the construction of the Khrushchev buildings was already ending everywhere. Such gardening and park benches made of individual wooden bars with cast-iron sides began to appear en masse not only in parks and squares, but also in courtyards. That's what they put here. It has been painted and repainted countless times, but once again the paint began to fall off in whole layers, so that the appearance of this bench became more and more unassuming every day. Moreover, one of the bars at the very back broke right in the middle, and the ends of this unsightly piece of wood rested on the courtyard asphalt, rising at the edges. No one cared about that disheveled door, or that broken, peeling bench. It was here, according to the criminal case, that the young robber Rusakov lived with his mother. Lena remembered this from the criminal case. She categorically refused to go up to the apartment. If this undeserved artist sees her, and even tells the USB major about it, Elena will not seem enough, and it will end up not only with suspension from work. After instructing Maxim what to say, what questions to ask, and how to behave, Lena waited for him and sat down on the broken bench near the entrance. It was possible to sit here. A few minutes later, the phone rang. Lena. Maxim's voice was clearly confused. She says she hasn't been to any prosecutor's office. I was with the police at the very beginning of the investigation, when my son was detained. But I have never been to the prosecutor's office, and today I only went out of the apartment to the store and took out the trash. Lena smiled at the unnecessary details and realized that Max had never expected such a turn and simply had no idea how to proceed. She got the picture right away. Send me her picture, she replied without hesitation. After a minute, Elena was still looking at the photo of a completely unfamiliar woman with some surprise. Well, Colonel, how could he know that she had never seen the defendant's mother? What's it? Competent analysis and subtle calculation? Accurate information obtained from nowhere? Or adventurism and impudence combined with incredible luck? The Colonel is not simple. Oh, how not simple. Discouraged, Maxim sat behind the wheel of a Logan parked near the playground, remained silent, and did not interfere with Elena's thoughts. Lena was always the think tank in their tandem, but Max was a good performer, However, not in today's case. If it hadn't been for Lena's tip about the photo, Maxim would have been completely blown away and lost. Max, his wife finally interrupted his sad thoughts about today's failure. How do you feel about the theater? I saw even more confusion in his eyes. No, in general, I know that you like theater. But do you love him enough to go there right now? She asked sarcastically, and Maxim realized that his wife had some kind of idea that required immediate implementation. Here's what I think. Lena decided to take pity on her puzzled husband. Madame Pseudo-Rusakova just classically played a worried, hysterical woman. Even I believed her, and went out into the hallway to get some water. This, I think, can only be portrayed by a professional actor. What if this young lady who gave me the money is a professional actress? Here we are in the theater, and we will check it out. We will look at the actors. Maybe we'll find an unwitting acquaintance. On the one hand, it was simple, even very simple, but it doesn't happen that way. Even if the idea is correct, but for example, may the false Rusakova not be involved in today's performance. So, do you go to performances all week? And it's not a fact that she's an actress. That's about how Maxim tried to dissuade Lena from going to the theater. But she convinced him otherwise. Max, you probably haven't been to the theater in ages. I forgot that there are always photos of the entire cast in the lobby. So we'll just look at them. And that's it. I remember her well. And we don't even have to watch the play if you don't want to. Of course, Maxim loved the theater and visited it several times, especially during the candy and bouquet period before the wedding, and then, too, although his basic knowledge of theater was mostly limited to Stanislavski's immortal phrase, "Theater begins with a hanger." For some reason, she always popped into his mind when it came to the theater. The Tolstoy City Drama Theater opened its season in early September, and by today, the ardor of avid theater-goers, indispensable visitors to premiere performances who knew each other by sight, had faded a little, so tickets could be bought right before the start of the performance. Today they were playing The Family of the Ghoul, based on Tolstoy's story. Not Alexei Nikolaevich, but Alexei Konstantinovich, the real count, and not Red, as the Soviet writer was seriously called, after whom the theater in the city was named. By the way, the Red Count, who was once an emigrant and a titled nobleman, who miraculously managed to become a favorite and pet of the Soviet government, was a distant relative of the real Count. Lena casually told all this to her uneducated husband, who had no idea that besides the two well-known Tolstoys in the literary world, there was also a third, also a Count, while they wandered through the foyer of the second floor, looking at photographs of actors of the local troupe. The huge, almost half-human-sized portraits of the artists, taken by a professional photographer, looked impressive and attracted a lot of people, so no one paid attention to Lena and Max, who were looking for a con artist. Most likely, future viewers could not even imagine that a real criminal investigation was unfolding right before their eyes. Maxim did not see citizen false Rusakova, so he did not bother looking for her, but simply moved from one portrait to another, trying to find familiar faces. Still, he went to the theater, though not often. Almost in the center of the portrait gallery, he finally saw the smiling face of a man he knew not only by hearsay, but had also seen in a play 2 years ago. According to a long-established tradition, during the school holidays, the City Drama Theater necessarily gave a matinee specifically for children. It was usually either a fairy tale for kids or a funny comedy for older kids. That's one such Averina, and got the whole family. We expected to see a fairy tale, but we ended up on Andrei Kuznetsov's Moscow Holidays. Maxim remembered the name of the author of the play even now. A funny comedy about high school students and for high school students, where the main role was played by Sasha Zazabin, whose portrait was now hanging in front of Maxim. He played in a very peculiar way, which is what Max remembers. For all 2 acts, Zazabin's character Alyosha Zhdanovich ran across the stage with a decent stack of paper sheets in his hand, not forgetting to periodically look at them. It seemed that the actor simply did not know the role, and was somehow hedging his bets. However, at the beginning of the second act, in order to justify his extraordinary behavior on stage, he nevertheless told his partner in the episode that he was going to enter the institute at the Faculty of Mathematics, and would use any free minute to study mathematics. It was even said something like, "This is not Tchaikovsky, Shostakovsky, this is mathematics." The audience liked the phrase with such a quirky surname, and clearly not from the text, and caused a cheerful stir in the audience. Zazibin realized that his impromptu performances were well received by the audience and set off into all sorts of trouble. The nonsense was more interesting than the other in his performance until the end of the second act, and the audience greeted the end of the performance with applause, awarding them mostly to Sasha Zazibin, who masterfully got out of a difficult situation. Maxim found out this later, and in the place where he least expected it, in the morgue, at work. When he was trying to tell his colleagues how much he liked the actor Zazibin because of his unconventional acting style before his lunch break for tea, Natasha, the one who bothered him with her pranks in the first year of service, suddenly declared, "Yes, Sasha is a great fellow. He was cast in this role just 2 hours before the performance. Andrei Zdanovich was supposed to play the role of Zdanovich there. He is an actor in their theater with that name, but he could not because of a heavy hangover after the New Year. And Sasha helped everyone out. And Zdanovich was reprimanded so that he would know the measure." Then Maxim remembered that in the program, in the list of actors and performers, Alexander Zazibin's name was handwritten above some other colored ballpoint pen. And Natasha, who turned out to be not only an avid theater-goer, but also a special backstage person, shared all sorts of theatrical stories and gossip with her colleagues throughout the break. It turns out that Sasha Zazibin, who Max liked so much for his eccentricity, a tall and handsome guy with slightly curly blonde hair, vaguely resembling a young Yesenin, was a hero lover not only on stage, but also outside the walls of the theater. He had no shortage of female fans, and he shamelessly took advantage of it. He has already managed to get married and divorced 2 or 3 times. Natasha spoke of his adventures with an easy-to-read longing and a touch of sadness, clearly regretting that she was not the object of his lust. At least, that's what Maxim thought. So he remembered the local landmark and was now looking at her portrait with interest, completely ignoring Elena. Lena stayed for a long time at the opposite wall opposite the portrait, where a young woman was depicted, whose age, despite all the tricks of the photographer, still showed quite clearly. At first, she looked at the portrait from different angles. Then she began to look for Maxim, who also froze at the photograph of the male actor. After a couple of minutes, their eyes met, and Max hurried to his wife. "It's her, Max," Elena said peremptorily, not doubting that Maxim would understand who she was talking about. Then she smiled. "And you said, 'It's too easy. We should get lucky sometime.'" A woman in her mid-40s was looking at Maxim from the wall, which she carefully concealed, and only small rays, wrinkles near the eyes, which the photographer did not pay attention to. And the cleavage area said that this was not a young girl, but a person who had seen her life. Despite the laughing eyes, they revealed a life experience that could not be called easy. "Natalia Perlinskaya," Lena continued after a while. "By the way, she's playing today." And she handed Maxim an open program, pointing with her finger at the actress's last name. "Who can we find out about her?" She looked around helplessly. At this time, the first bell rang and the audience streamed into the hall. An elderly woman in a plain blue uniform with a yellow chiffon scarf around her neck was standing near the door leading to the back rows of the stalls. She answered questions from theater-goers rushing into the hall, showed them something, and Lena realized that this was the usher who could answer some questions. The boys spent half of the first act in the theater buffet. Max's timid attempts to go to his seats in the stalls to watch the play were immediately stopped by Lena, who decided today at all costs to meet with Natalia Perlinskaya, that is, the false Rusakova, and get her to confess to her own atrocities. Somehow Lena no longer doubted her involvement in the criminal group of Colonel Nezhnov. The detective sat at a table in the back of the buffet room, near a wall with photographs of scenes from past performances. At first, Maxim did not feel very comfortable here. He could not understand and accept in any way how it was possible to come to a play at the theater, but instead of contemplating acting, spend time at the buffet. It seemed to him that the middle-aged barmaid in a starched white apron and a white hat or coconut was looking at him with unconditional condemnation. Maxim sat unnaturally straight, looked around and often surreptitiously glanced at the local hostess behind the counter, until Elena, realizing his concerns,
reminded him that the same Eugene Onegin came to the theater almost at the end of the performance. And nothing. It was even considered quite decent. And at the Moscow Conservatory, for your information, you cannot even take a concert ticket, but just sit in the buffet, have a drink, have a snack, and listen to music. Audibility allows. So relax and get busy. She finished a short tutorial on theater and buffet etiquette. The guys took a cup of cappuccino and a couple of ice cream balls in a real metal creamer and started brainstorming. All of Maxim's proposals boiled down mainly to a forceful solution to the problem: to put the criminal to sleep with the help of a protective measure, drag her into a car, take her to a quiet place, and interrogate her there using the same measure. She'll crack up like a sweetheart. She'll even write a clean one. Max remembered his poor semi-criminal experience at the wrong time and flashed his knowledge of prison jargon. Lena was against it. No, as for the conversation and confession, maybe you will have to apply the cherished measure, but drag her sleeping into the car in full view of your colleagues? Sorry. Do you know such an actor as Sasha Zazibin? Unexpectedly for Maxim, she asked, thinking about something of her own. Max almost jumped in surprise, because it was in front of his portrait that he spent the most time remembering the conversation in the morgue 2 years ago. Well, wow, how small the world is. The usher in the lobby, when I started a conversation with her and started asking about the artists and this Natalia, said that I looked very much like Zazibin's first wife, an actor in their theater. Can it be used somehow? I wonder if Prilinskaya knows the first wife of this Sasha. It was here that Maxim shared with his wife his information about the theatrical hero lover, which he received from Natasha, a pathologist. Lena thought about it, but after a few minutes, when the ice cream and coffee were over, she pulled her husband into the hall to watch the play, saying that the puzzle had worked out. Max did not understand what she meant. He habitually waved his hand, completely trusting his wife, the investigator. Max never got to watch the play to the end. Estimating that there was no more than 10 minutes left before the end of the performance, which, as written in the program, lasts an hour and 50 minutes. Lena patted Maxim on the arm, nodded her head towards the exit, and slowly began to make her way to the door. Tom had no choice but to follow her. The service entrance to the theater was located on the side of a small alley. It was so narrow that even 2 cars could hardly separate here. Nevertheless, Maxim, yielding to Elena's requests, parked near the side entrance, hugging the curb as much as possible, and waited for the actors who had performed the performance to come out into the fresh air. Lena took a seat in the back seat. Soon, an impressive crowd of satisfied spectators formed on the brightly lit square in front of the theater, which quickly dispersed. Someone rushed to the bus stop, located 50 meters away, someone to their cars in the parking lot near the theater building, someone living next door, just planned to his apartment, enjoying a quiet evening. When only a few Melpomene fans remained on the theater square, who had not yet decided where to continue the celebration of the soul, the artists who had worked, tired but satisfied, stretched out of the service entrance. They went out one at a time, in pairs, in small laughing companies, in order to disappear just as quickly from the field of view of the Averins, who were hiding in an ambush. Lena opened the door a crack, got out of the car, rested her chin on her hands folded on the passenger door, and began to carefully peer into the dim spot of light near the service entrance, where everyone leaving the theater got for a moment. Natalia Prilinskaya, fortunately, went out alone. And although her face was covered not by a straw hat, as in the morning, but by a completely normal autumn and even very pretty hat, Elena recognized her. I found out, and was immediately transformed. Natasha! Prilinskaya! She shouted, smiling, at the top of her voice, came out from behind the car door that hid her, and, without raising her arms high, slightly spread her arms to the sides, as if she wanted to hug her bosom friend. The actress, realizing that she was being addressed, turned around and at the same time with interest and bewilderment, began to look at the seemingly vaguely familiar woman who called out to her so affably. Elena, seeing the cautious reaction, which was still more positive, changed her joyful tone to a slightly offended one. Natasha! What are you talking about? Don't you recognize an old friend? She knew about the weakness of creative people, most of whom consider themselves unappreciated, for compliments and delights addressed to them, even if not entirely justified, but so desirable. Yes, I am Sasha Zazibin's first wife, Larissa. He introduced us at the banquet after the premiere, where you played so well. He said, "Here's our leading actress. Don't you really remember?" She finished with undisguised surprise. Prilenskaya was taken aback, then, carefully examining her face, took a few steps towards the disappointed woman who lowered her outstretched arms. "Larissa? Is that you?" "I never would have thought." Lena interrupted her cheerfully. "There's nothing to think about. Get in the car. At least we'll give you a ride home. And you can tell me about my ex, how he's doing now. And I'll introduce you to my new husband," she chattered incessantly. "By the way, he is a very well-known runway and salon makeup artist in Tomsk," she finished with undisguised pride. Maxim almost choked after this statement and cleared his throat a couple of times to regain his breath. Of course, he sometimes served as a makeup artist in the morgue to keep the deceased's face as fresh as possible and even used acrylic paints for this. But Lena certainly overdid her fame, and comparing a salon stylist with a hairdresser was too much for the dead. Stunned, Natalia, of course, appreciated the last message, slightly pulled away from Elena, who was leaning towards her, trying to press her cheek against her friend's cheek, and asked in amazement, "So what are you in Tomsk now?" Lena realized that she had to be much more careful, and she couldn't think of anything better to turn the conversation in another direction. Never mind. Sit down, come on." And after waiting for the actress to climb into the salon, she lightly hit Maxim on the back of the head. "My husband Max. Max, say hello," she said a little arrogantly, immediately demonstrating who was the boss in the house. Maxim greeted me warmly, and, trying to get away from the theater as quickly as possible, immediately clarified, "Where are we going?" It was necessary to go to the hydroturbine, a fairly comfortable village almost on the very outskirts of the city. The modern 9-story buildings where the false Rusakova lived were not at all related to those Khrushchev houses, where the real citizen Rusakova lived. Taking his time, as if giving his girlfriends plenty to chat, Maxim got to the hydroturbine in about 20 minutes. It was dark outside, but recently installed LED lights along the road brightly illuminated the roadway, sidewalks, and even part of the courtyards. It was not possible to settle down in a secluded place for a serious conversation with Natalia, as planned. "Max, turn here." Lena nodded at a small area in front of the Pyaterochka store, which stood slightly away from the road, which was not so clearly illuminated. There were only 2 or 3 passenger cars parked in front of the store doors. Maxim sat a little to one side, although it was almost impossible to see what was going on in his car because of the tinted windows. "Well, that's it. We have arrived, Citizen Rusakova," Elena said, referring not at all to the destination. Her voice had changed beyond recognition. He became serious, stern, and there were distinctly not at all sincere notes in him. Natalia Prilenskaya, at the mention of Rusakova's last name, jerked in fright, retreated deeper into the cabin, helplessly turned her head, trying to figure out what was going on. "I see you've understood what's going on," Lena continued with satisfaction. "Your reaction speaks for itself." I hope I was recognized. She appreciated the actress's attempt to examine her in the dark of the unlit salon, and asked Max to turn on the light for a second. "Is that better?" a recent friend asked sarcastically. Yes. You were the one who dropped the money off to me this morning. They gave a bribe, so to speak. So I wanted to know how much you were paid to ruin the life of a completely unknown person who has done nothing wrong to you? And who is this mysterious villain who persuaded you to commit this crime? You do realize that this is a crime, right? Giving a significant bribe, to which your action belongs, is punishable by imprisonment for a term not exceeding 5 years. But I think that's enough for you. You'll participate in amateur prison activities. Maybe you'll get out on parole because of this. Lena was already joking angrily. Still, Prilenskaya was a good actress. After a few seconds, she transformed. From a frightened, confused woman, she turned into a shrill, hysterical woman, accustomed to solving all her problems with the help of a high-pitched voice, rich mobile facial expressions, and expressive gestures that attract the attention of the audience. "Who are you? What do you need? I don't know anything. Let me out immediately," she wailed, trying to open the door, which was blocked by the driver in a timely manner, Realizing the futility of her attempts, she intensified the onslaught. "I do not know any Rusakova. I'm going to call the police." She screamed even higher. "Try it," Maxim said very significantly, turning to her. "What do you think? Are you going to put my wife under the article, and I'm going to keep quiet? No, darling, you're wrong. If you don't shut up, I'll just strangle you." And added a little more quietly, "The creature." And he sounded so meaningful. There was so much desperate anger in his voice that Prilenskaya fell silent in fright and hurriedly began to look for another way out of a difficult situation for herself. Lana was walking her own, more legitimate path so far. "Do you want us to go to the police right now? Do you think there are no surveillance cameras in the prosecutor's office, and that they won't identify you there? You're wrong. You'll have to tell everything anyway, only to another investigator, and you won't get out of there. But from here there's a chance." She finished thoughtfully. "I'm not going anywhere." Natalia tried to fight, still trying to save face. "And no one recognizes me. My face is nowhere to be seen. I was wearing a hat with a brim." Maxim and Lena laughed at the same time, which caused a wave of indignation reflected on the actress's face. She did not realize that she had let slip about her visit to the prosecutor's office. And when the guys opened her eyes, she shut up and fell silent. "Maxim, I hope you're recording our conversation," Lena said through laughter. "Now turn off the recorder." For a while, seeing her husband's surprised look, she countered his next question. "Tell you what, dear Mrs. False Rusakova," she continued resolutely, "I have neither the time nor the desire to convince you of anything else. You're going to tell me everything now anyway, everything you know, and maybe what you don't know. But it's better to tell the truth." Ignoring her opponent's indignantly open mouth, Lena took her phone out of her bag and pointed the back of it at Prilenskaya. "This is a portable generator of high-frequency infrasound vibrations, if you've heard of such a directional weapon. Only this one, unlike the others, instead of fear and panic causes a person to have a headache, severe or very severe, and can lead to the fact that a person, in other words, brain boils. Blood clots form in the vessels of the brain, and a person dies from an acute cerebral circulatory disorder, from an ischemic stroke, to make it clearer. And, most importantly, no examination will find any external influence. Simply, online. If you don't answer the questions, you will die, and we will call an ambulance and send you to the morgue. The police, who will definitely come. Let's say a woman asked for a ride, but suddenly she felt sick in the car. They tried to help, but they couldn't. Things happen. The matter-of-fact tone didn't match the thing she was talking about. It was difficult to assess Prilenskaya's reaction in the dark, and Lena decided to demonstrate to her that the conversations with her were serious. She gently poked Max in the shoulder to keep him awake, and turned on the flashlight on her phone, shining its light into the stubborn passenger's face. Maxime, who listened attentively to the conversation and actually recorded the dialogue on a dictaphone, understood everything correctly. In the light of the lantern, Natalia's eyes darted around at first, then her face wrinkled. A grimace of pain appeared, which became more and more expressive. Then there was a half-moan, half-sob, and she clutched her head with her hands. Max immediately weakened the effect. Lena turned off the flashlight. "Do you understand everything? Is that enough? Or repeat it?" "What is it?" she asked without pity. From the darkness of the cabin, which seemed even thicker after the light of the lantern, a quiet voice rang out. "I'll tell you everything." "Max, record," Elena commanded. The investigator felt at home again. "I was actually asked to do this by a friend of mine, and he gave the money for this case too." Natalia began her confession, but Lena did not let her continue. "Stop. Stop." She stopped him harshly. "That won't do. What are these streamlined phrases? One person. For this case. The recording is underway, Natalia, mostly for you. It will replace a written confession for now, then write it down. Let's start with, specifically, who in detail, for which case, what amount, and then in order. You'll get home faster." Lena's last sentence instilled some optimism in the frightened actress's mind. It's not that she's afraid to give up her life. Dying at 45 is nonsense. Natalia simply did not realize what was happening and did not fully believe either in Max's threats or in the deadly effect of Elena's strange weapon, but nevertheless decided to be frank. She didn't want such a terrible, overwhelming, mind-numbing headache to happen again. But she had no doubt that the strange phone would turn on again if she didn't say anything. And the threats of this new husband. Such a man can strangle. 2 days ago, an old acquaintance, Boris Makagon, called her. He was once a good lawyer and helped Natalia a lot in one rather sensitive case. Moreover, he took a purely symbolic fee, stating that he prefers to pay off beautiful girls in a completely different way. And even though it was said jokingly at a table in a restaurant, but the sequel had, sometimes they met without any obligations. Soon, by the decision of the Council of the Bar Association, he was kicked out of the lawyers with a wording like, for violating the norms of professional ethics. Natalia found out about this quite by chance from one of her friends, who, encouraged by the favorable resolution of her case, advised her to contact Makagon. Boris did not talk about the change in his status during meetings, and Natalia pretended that she did not know anything. However, they haven't talked much lately, and suddenly he called and offered to meet like in the good old days. Well, in the morning he asked for a favor, of course, which was to give money to the investigator of the prosecutor's office, Averina. At first she refused, was indignant, even cried. But the former lawyer was persistent and very convincing about his complete collapse if he did not fulfill the request of very serious people to whom he owed more than a decent amount, the size of which Natasha better not know. At the same time, he guaranteed complete security for Natalia herself, who would understand the seriousness of the creditors, even by the fact that she would go to the prosecutor's office completely freely. She would be escorted without any documents. But still, for added safety, you need to make up a little and cover your face with at least the brim of your hat. Everything worked out for her, and Boris even thanked her with a certain amount of money. Not a very large one, but still. After all, $1,000 is not lying on the road. How do I find this, Boris? Lena asked no less harshly. Having received the coveted long-awaited address, she continued. Natalia, give me your phone number. Elena's voice was so demanding that the stunned actress did not have the strength to demand an explanation. She silently handed the phone to the investigator. I assure you that nothing will happen to him. This is done only for your safety, so that you don't do anything stupid. Don't call your suddenly passionate boyfriend about our meeting. He's a low and mean man, Natalia. He's not worth worrying about. He took advantage of your affection for him to solve his criminal problems. It's certainly worthy of a real man. She continued sarcastically. But she ended the conversation in a completely different, simple and calm tone. Do you enter the theater through the service entrance? In the darkness of the salon, I saw the affirmative nod of the actress. Is that where the janitor should be sitting? Another nod. You can pick up his phone tomorrow. Kind people will find it at the service entrance. Assume that one of the artists has lost it and will hand it over to the janitor. Can you get home by yourself from here? She clarified, and received another affirmative nod, since Natalia Prilinskaya, who was at a loss for answers, simply did not have the strength. Still not saying goodbye, we will definitely meet, hopefully in a completely different setting. Good luck.